I thank the ranking member, and I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to the gentleman from Texas presiding, Mr. Roy.
I thank the gentleman. Question for the panel. I mean, what amount of death and destruction among the people of Texas or any other state is sufficient to say the state should take action under the law? Like, how much death should Texas take? How many Texans should die every day? Again, fentanyl, we've got 75,000 across the country, whatever the thousands are in Texas. How many of those should die every year before the state of Texas does something about it? Okay, put aside the fentanyl because, oh, that's all ports of entry problem. That's all bogus. We could have that debate separately. There are other issues with that. Border Patrol is distracted. But I would just say, Mr. Webster, as someone who's a Texan, what is your answer to that question, right? Before Texas takes action, the governor is taking action, in the absence of action from the President of the United States, do you think there is a level of death, destruction, danger to the people of Texas that he should tolerate in the absence of the federal government doing his job?
No, there's no, I think the governor has a duty and obligation to protect the citizens of Texas, and when he sees harms coming upon Texas, he has an obligation to act, and has.
Yeah, Mr. Jabwat, I mean, is there a level of danger to the people of Texas that you believe would say the governor has a right to go defend itself, as in a family whose house is being invaded at night, has people coming in and trying to attack one's family? Does the governor not have some duty to be able to defend? For example, if cartels came across the Rio Grande, guns a-blazing, not wearing a uniform of Mexico, but just a hodgepodge of individuals in various articles of clothing came across guns a-blazing into Laredo and said, could the governor repel that with DPS? Not the National Guard. Could the governor say, you guys, boys, shoot back?
Are you asking whether the Texas has the police power to address armed people running around in the streets
coming
guns?
Across the Rio Grande? They're armed. Can the governor repel
Once they're in the state of Texas, if they're violating Texas's criminal laws, of course the governor has the ability.
So if they're violating Texas's criminal laws, apparently the governor can do something about it. That's an interesting observation. I think it's an important one. Because of course the governor of Texas can deal with it if the laws of Texas are being violated and the people that the governor is supposed to represent is entitled to defend them. I would ask another question, which is, would the states, in this case, Texas or Arizona, we have two representatives from those two states here, past and present, would those states have entered the union had the theory being promulgated by my colleagues on the left been openly put forward and said that we, the federal government, will not enforce immigration laws to the tune of 900,000 releases last year, plus hundreds of thousands of more through parole, plus hundreds of thousands more gotaways, overwhelming the jails that we said, oh, sure, just use the jails, go do it, go arrest people that are bad actors, filling the jails, filling the hospitals, filling the schools. If the federal government had said, here's the deal, Arizona, here's the deal, Texas, can you, either of you gentlemen, imagine a scenario in which Arizona or Texas would have joined the union? Texas in 1845, and forgive me for not knowing the year from Arizona. You, Mr. Brnovich, or Mr. Biggs would know. Mr. Webster, could you answer that question? Would they have joined the union under that theory?
I mean, if I was there, I can't imagine taking on a situation where I would be defenseless. And what you're proposing is a situation where Texas would be defenseless.
Correct. Mr. Brnovich, can you imagine that scenario?
Well, I will just go as we talk about first principles and documents, and Mr. Webster just spoke. So let me quote from Daniel Webster's 1806 dictionary, the first American dictionary. At that time, the word invaded was defined to mean enter or seize in a hostile manner. Webster's 1828 dictionary, furthermore, went to describe invasion to include attack, assault, assail, to attack or infringe or encroach on and violate. And if you look, with all due respect to my colleague at the end of the table, he had mentioned James Madison. Look, I mean, during the constitutional debates, if you read Federalist 43, you read the original Federalist Papers, the states entered this union. The states created the federal government with an expectation that the president, the commander-in-chief, would exercise authority when it came to, you know, the commander-in-chief authority in defending the states. However, that's why if you have to read this all together, Article 1, Section 10, and Article 4, the states have this inherent right to defend themselves when the federal government will not do its job. And so it's not an offensive or a proactive power, so to speak. It is defensive in nature, that every state has the ability to defend itself and its citizens from either state or non-state hostile actors.
Well, I agree, and I appreciate the comments from the gentleman from Arizona, the Attorney General. I appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to recognize the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The chair will recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Let me just ask each and every one of you a question. The 3,000 plus Americans that died on September 11th, do you think they're comforted by the definition of invasion that has been posited by the ranking member? Just go down the line. Mr. Brnovich, do you think they're comforted by that definition of invasion?
Well, I can't speak to other members of the committee, but I will just say that obviously the president is at the apex of his or her power when it comes to border issues and immigration. So I feel like there's two ships passing in the night. This is an issue related to security, border security, right, not immigration.
All right, Mr. Brnovich, question. 3,000 Americans were killed. People are trying to say that there's a specific invasion that we haven't been invaded since 1814. Do you think the families of the 3,000 who were killed would suggest that what happened on September 11th, the product of overstayed visas and a bad system that we have here in terms of protecting against unwanted attacks, that is an invasion from the standpoint of any logical conclusion of an American who's concerned about their safety and well-being?
September 11th was an invasion and an attack on the
Mr. Hayek, would you think so?
I would think they would not be comforted.
Right. Mr. Webster?
It was an invasion.
Right. Now, Mr. Jabwat, yes or no?
I wouldn't purport to speak for the families of people who were killed.
Right. Do you think as an American, it was an invasion to have people come in and bomb buildings, fly planes into buildings, and kill 3,000 people?
You know, within the meaning of that clause of the Constitution.
People who overstayed visas.
Within the meaning of that clause of the Constitution? Because I agree with everybody here. It was an attack. I was blocks away when it happened.
So is that a yes or no? No. I mean, you're saying no then.
Not with it. I don't think so.
Right.
Not within
So for the average American watching this, and they're saying, okay, that is how we have to live in the modern world. Say that, okay, unless the redcoats are marching right in, you know, coming right up in through New York, coming up the river and saying, okay, we're here, right? Or unless there's a army with, you know, coming across the Rio Grande, that's the invasion. But when 3,000 Americans are dead because we were attacked by people who overstayed their visas because we have a very broken immigration system, or we now have people who are going around the country that just end up in Minnesota, who've been here for a year, that are clearly affiliated with terrorist organizations, that somehow we don't have to be concerned about whether or not that's an invasion, right? Do you believe that President Biden is responsible for the crisis at the southern border? Yes or no? Mr. Brnovich?
Absolutely.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Webster?
Yes.
Mr. Jabwat?
No,
President Biden responsible for the crisis at the southern border?
President Biden is responsible for the policies of his administration.
So is he responsible for the present crisis at the southern border?
And to the extent that his administration,
Is that a yes or no?
would you let me finish?
I mean, is yes or no? Is he responsible for the crisis at the southern border?
He's
He and-
responsible for the policies of his administration and their effects at the
Well, I'll take that as a yes then. Is the Biden administration responsible for the border crisis this country is facing? That, I think, was a yes. Do you believe that what is currently happening on the southern border constitutes an invasion, as we understand it in the Constitution and is applied in today's world, where we're dealing with the forces that we're dealing with around the world, with forces who want to endanger the American people? Mr. Brnovich, yes or no, is what is currently happening on the southern border an invasion?
As our first in the nation opinion expresses, this does constitute an invasion pursuant to the U.S. Constitution.
Thank you, Mr. Brnovich. Mr. Hayek?
Yes, because the cartels are committing hostile encroachment onto Texas, and that constitutes an invasion.
Thank you, Mr. Hayek. Mr. Webster?
Yes, absolutely.
And Mr. Jabwat, I think we know the answer.
No.
You believe it's no.
Not within the meaning of that
And so
clause of the Constitution.
here's a question. Do you believe that states like Texas or Arizona or any other state has a right to defend their citizens and take action to secure the border, particularly in the complete and abject failure of the federal government to do so, as the Constitution contemplated, notwithstanding the views expressed by some on both sides of the aisle to the contrary? Yes or no, do the citizens of those states have the right to defend their citizens and take action to secure their border? Mr. Brnovich?
The governor does indeed have the ability to call out the National Guard or use state resources to protect the citizens of their state.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes, it's clear that right is clearly stated in the Constitution.
Mr. Webster?
Yes for Texas.
Mr. Jabwat?
Again, 150 years of Supreme Court precedent says that states do not have the authority to take immigration matters into their own hands. And
Was
no
Dred
governor,
Scott a good
no
opinion?
governor has the right.
Was Dred Scott a good opinion that we should follow?
We're not talking about Dred Scott here. We're
Do
talking
we,
about
next
150
question.
yards.
Do we, right, what, but,
And no
but it does
governor,
matter.
no governor has the authority to override that Supreme Court
That wasn't the
precedent
question.
or
That wasn't the question. Mr.
Constitution
Jabwat, with all due
by
respect, that wasn't the
claiming that
question.
an invasion
Your
is
time,
taking
your time
place.
is up. You've answered the question. We know where you stand. Do we have operational control of our southern border as defined by the Secure Fence Act of 2006, which states operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries in the United States, includes entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband? Yes or no? And then I'll finish my questions.
No.
Do not.
Mr. Jabwat.
No, and we never have, and we never will by that definition.
Well, at least that's consistent with Secretary Mayorkas, who told me under oath in this room that he did have operational control. With that, I the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you.
I thank the ranking member. I want to thank her and my Democrat colleagues for working with us to try to move this along. I believe we're going to be able to finish the hearing without breaking. The Prime Minister has not yet started speaking. So we're going to proceed, and then we hopefully won't have to break and come back for everybody's benefit. Ms. Herridge, could you just quickly, for the benefit of the committee, articulate the awards and honors you received in carrying out your profession?
Wow, that's a little embarrassing, but
No, it's important.
best. I've always tried to stay in the background. I'm so proud of the work that we did at CBS News. I was part of an Emmy-winning team. I was also nominated for investigative Emmys primarily for the work that we did revealing the toxic exposure of our veterans, specifically a group who were based in Uzbekistan in K2. This was the launching off pad for classified operations into Afghanistan. We also did reporting that was a catalyst for legislation, the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, which has opened new opportunities and benefits and payments for 1 million veterans and civilians. This was real impact reporting, and it was accountability reporting on both the left and the right.
And you mentioned Emmys, other awards. In other words, is there any indication of, negative conduct in carrying out your profession, right? I mean, you've been getting awards. Nothing would indicate that there was a failure to perform your duties, failure to do your job competently, correct?
Congressman, I think what you're asking me is whether I was terminated for poor performance. I don't believe that my record would reflect that. I don't know what factors the CBS News executives considered when they terminated my position. There was tension over the Hunter Biden reporting and the Biden administration, but I can't say for sure why I was let go.
And you mentioned that tension. You had been one of the reporters, certainly in what we might define as the mainstream media, that was focusing intently on the Hunter Biden laptop, on the various facts surrounding the Biden family and the flow of money and all of the things involved with that. Is that correct?
That is correct. For the full picture, though, I was also the reporter at CBS News who obtained the audio tape of former President Trump apparently bragging about the Iran classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, and I also exposed how 50 soldiers were denied the Purple Heart under the Trump administration in an effort to de-escalate after a ballistic missile attack in Iran. I'm someone who calls balls and strikes, Congressman. I just follow the facts where they lead. That has always been my calling card.
And when CBS let you go, was it around the time of you calling out the Trump administration or around the time that you were pursuing more of the Hunter Biden?
I was let go a few days after the special counsel Robert Hur report into President Biden's handling of classified information.
At the same time all that's going on, you're managing the issue with Fox and the reality that you are being held in contempt, and you've touched on it, and I don't want to repeat it too much, but it's really important that, for the record, you are in fact being held in contempt by a court at the tune of $800 a day, which, as you've noticed, has thankfully been stayed pending appeal. That is correct?
That is correct, and I'd also like to emphasize, Congressman, that I have total respect for for the legal process. My case is in front of the appellate court, and so I'm limited in what I can say. I reject characterizations that the court is being heavy-handed. It's well within their discretion to levy these fines. I was making the point that for many journalists, facing fines of that significance would be insurmountable, and they'd have to make a hard choice about whether to protect their sources.
In closing, could you just reiterate the extent of your belief of what this means for other journalists? And you alluded to before, smaller journalists without the protection of the bubble of the kind of corporate structure that you've got with Fox backing you up from your previous reporting.
I just don't think many journalists could withstand the threat of significant and crippling financial sanctions. They may not have a former employer or a current employer who's in a position to mount a vigorous and costly defense. I think it's a very dangerous period for journalism. The Press Act would close the legal gap in the system, this ambiguity that I've had to deal with for 2 years. And I want to emphasize, this is not about a single journalist. It's not about a single story. It's not about a single network. What happens in my case, the passage of the Press Act, is going to impact every journalist working in this room, and it's going to impact every journalist in the United States and for the next generation to come. If there's anything I can accomplish in my career as a journalist, it's going to be getting this over the finish line. I feel this with every core of my being.
Thank you, Ms. Harridge. I do want to acknowledge that the gentleman from North Carolina has been waiting here patiently throughout the hearing. He indicated he didn't necessarily have a lot of questions, but I do want to give him a moment here at close before we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think
Thank the chairman. Thank the director. I think as the director knows, I was a prosecutor under Project Safe Neighborhoods in the U.S. Attorney's Office, worked closely with ATF in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. I share your sentiment about the patriotic Americans serving in ATF trying to stop violent criminals from moving drugs and using firearms against the law in ways that are undermining the safety and security of the American people. And I want to thank those men and women for what they do every day in that service. But would the director agree that there have been times where ATF have not gotten it right? I realize that with respect to the case we've already discussed with respect to Mr. Malinowski, that you're saying that's an investigation, but what about something like Fast and Furious?
So, of course, like any agency, there are times where we don't get things right and can improve.
So a couple of questions for you, along these lines. I think it's really important for the American people to understand. Do you, as the director of ATF, do you believe that the American people have a constitutional right, an individual right, to keep and bear arms?
The Supreme Court has made it clear, and yes, the Second Amendment has been interpreted numerous times by the Supreme Court, just as you. There's more to it, but yes, what you have said, yes.
Okay, and so you believe that you interpret the Constitution that way.
I interpret all the laws the way that the Supreme Court says they're to be interpreted. And when the Supreme Court speaks on something...
Would you have said that about Plessy?
Congressman, I work for a law enforcement agency. I'm not a judge.
But
I accept the rulings of the court, including that one. I'm not dodging your question.
Do you, as the director of ATF, believe there is an individual constitutional right to bear arms?
Yes, there is one. The Supreme Court has said it.
Along those lines, do you, as the director of ATF, believe that the federal government should maintain a registry or otherwise track, catalog, keep records of the transactions of firearms conducted by the American people, such that you would know what firearms I possess?
Congress has explicitly forbidden ATF from keeping a registry, and we do not. Again, we obey the law. We don't make the law, we obey it.
Do you, as the director, believe that the federal government should track ownership of firearms among the American people?
Congressman, we follow the law as you put it, as you pass it. You have said we cannot have a registry. We follow that provision and will continue to as long as it's the law.
As the director of ATF, do you have a position on that? Should we track ownership of firearms.
As director of ATF, my position is, if it's in the law, we follow it.
If I want to sell a gun that I currently own to a friend in Texas, do I need a license?
So getting into the specifics of the rule, which is in litigation. So first of
This
all,
ought to be a really simple question.
I understand. So you look at the totality of the circumstances. If we're talking about an isolated sale from somebody who is not engaged in the business of dealing firearms, you don't need a license.
All right. So if I, a citizen, this country, I live in Texas, I have a weapon and I want to sell it to a fellow Texan, on an isolated basis, do I need a license?
Again, if you are not engaged in the business of selling firearms, those are Congress's words.
If I post a sale for a firearm last year, okay, and I do that on some relevant website like TexasGunTrader.com, and I sell that weapon, I sell it for $500, and then I inherit a gun from my dad or from my uncle, and I inherit it last month, and it's like 6 months later, and I sell it for another profit. I sell it for $500. And then less than a year later, I have another weapon that I inherit or I've got and I decide I don't need anymore and I sell it. Is that engaging in the business? Is that engaging in activity that means I need a license?
I think pursuant to the clear language of Congress in doing this and to the things we've said in the rule, we specifically mentioned inheritance as one of the things that is not indicative of engaging in the business.
What if I have just 12, what if I have 12, 15, or 20 weapons and I sell 3 over the course of a year?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just saying, if I have about 50, let's assume I had 15 or 20 weapons and I wanted to sell 3 over the course of a year.
I think my
I'd like to make money on
my
them.
reaction to what you're saying is that you look at it's very clear that you look at the totality of the circumstances. We can go through an endless series of hypotheticals. Hypotheticals aren't the way we address cases.
Do you understand, and I realize I'm over my time, do you understand why the average citizen sitting out there saying, I've got 400 pages of rulemaking, might not understand what they are allowed to do under the law when the director of the ATF can't look at a member of Congress and tell me yes or no, emphatically, whether or not if I sell a weapon or 2 weapons or 3 weapons or 5, whether or not I need a license? Do you think that's the way the law ought to be, or the rules?
Respectfully, I believe that the rule that we have promulgated provides way more information and clarity than
400 pages?
Than just the 1 or 2 sentences that Congress provided. And we were seeing
And you
massive
can't even answer it.
non-compliance.
How can the average American know it?
Time the gentleman has expired.
We are in the business of knowing, and we would look at the whole case, and we would determine based on the, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from North Carolina.
A final question in my last minute. The Department of Justice did not assert privilege with regard to the transcript, correct?
That's right.
And you articulated a minute ago to my colleague that the best evidence rule says that the transcribed copy is admissible, right? But how can you claim privilege in the face of not just a legislative inquiry, but a constitutional impeachment inquiry? How can you claim privilege for something that you just testified was effectively the same thing? How can you claim privilege for the audio of the transcript you just testified was the same?
I just testified the words are the same. Sensing an audio is different. You have not given any explanation, and there's nothing in the impeachment resolution that would make a difference with respect to
I respectfully
audio.
disagree. I would ask you one last question. Is the decision not to prosecute President Biden for effectively the same crime for which DOJ is prosecuting President Trump, is it because DOJ has determined the president is not mentally fit to defend himself and stand trial for his crime, but former President Trump is?
I say again, that's an inaccurate description of Mr. Herr's report, and I would rest on Mr. Herr's report.
It's the only assertion he made. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for appearing before the Judiciary Committee. I read a report recently that the D.C. United States Attorney's Office had only devoted 5% of resources to January 6th prosecutions. But I've also understand from many conversations that the most or all of the United States U.S. Attorney districts contributed an AUSA or an investigator to the effort. Can you confirm whether the department across the board has been providing additional support from other U.S. Attorney's offices in terms of AUSAs or investigators contributing for the January 6th investigations?
Yes, that's true, and that began before I became Attorney General. That continued after I became Attorney General.
So multiple resources across the department have been devoted to that effort, including other districts?
Yes,
okay.
Because of the significance of an attack on democracy in this body.
The reason I'm asking about that is in terms of the focus of the resources of the department. If staff would put up on the screen, there's a number of people here that I want to see if you can identify who they are. What we have here in the bottom right-hand corner is a woman named Lizbeth Medina. She was found dead in a bathtub in Texas. Her mom found her, hoping to see her in a parade that night. She was killed by Rafael Gouveia Romero, who was here illegally. On the bottom left-hand corner, you have Laken Riley. She was killed by 26-year-old Jose Ibarra, arrested by U.S. Customs and Border Protection after he unlawfully entered the United States near El Paso, Texas. Up above, you have officers Richard Yaruso, 26, and Officer Christopher Abreu, 26. Both were shot this last weekend by Bernardo Raul Castro Mata, a 19-year-old Venezuelan national apprehended by U.S. Border Patrol after he unlawfully entered the United States near Eagle Pass in July of 2023. What we have is a continued effort by the federal government to fail to secure the border of the United States, and Americans are dying or getting shot. In this case, law enforcement getting shot, 2 young women who are dead. My question for you with respect to the department is, do you believe that Texas has a right to defend itself and to ensure that people who are in this country are not here illegally, and that we can protect the citizens of Texas from people unlawfully here who are committing crimes to Lizbeth Medina, who's no longer with us because the federal government refused to do its job? Yet the Department of Justice is suing the state of Texas to stop implementation of SB 4. So do you say, as the Attorney General of the United States, Texas does not have a right to defend itself and to protect our citizens from murder by people who have come here illegally into the United States?
I say, as the Attorney General and as a human being, that my heart goes out to the families, that these are terrible, terrible events. And I say, secondly, as the Attorney General, the way to stop people like this from coming into the United States is to give more resources to the Border Patrol so that they can prevent
Mr. Attorney General, no.
You don't want
to we the people of Texas, money's not going to solve the problem when the Department of Homeland Security and the President of the United States refuse to enforce the law, ignore the policies, and Lizbeth Medina would be here alive today if we were following the law. Laken Riley would be here today if we had not released a killer onto the streets of the United States of America through parole policies that this administration is advancing. And the Department of Justice is suing the state of Texas in court, taking valuable resources to go against the people of Texas, when Texas simply wants to say that we should have a say in stopping people who are illegally, arrest them, and be able to deal with that on our own terms when the federal government refuses to do its job.
As reflected in our filings in that case, we are in court because the United States Supreme Court in Arizona versus the United States held that states cannot adopt their own immigration.
You're in court because you're choosing to try to stop Texas from enforcing the laws that the federal government is refusing to enforce. And by the way, that's not the same thing as Arizona. But a final question in my last minute. The Department of Justice did not assert privilege with regard to the transcript, correct?
That's right.
And you articulated a minute ago to my colleague that the best evidence rule says that the transcribed copy is admissible, right? But how can you claim privilege in the face of not just a legislative inquiry, but a constitutional impeachment inquiry? How can you claim privilege for something that you just testified was effectively the same thing? How can you claim privilege for the audio of the transcript you just testified was the same?
I just testified the words are the same. Sensing an audio is different. You have not given any explanation, and there's nothing in the impeachment resolution that would make a difference with respect to audio.
I respectfully disagree. I would ask you one last question. Is the decision not to prosecute President Biden for effectively the same crime for which DOJ is prosecuting President Trump, is it because DOJ has determined the president is not mentally fit to defend himself and stand trial for his crime, but former President Trump is?
I say again, that's an inaccurate description of Mr. Herr's report, and I would rest on Mr. Herr's report.
It's the only assertion he made. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The committee will take a short break, and then we'll be back in 10 minutes, 10 minutes.
Are you familiar with the case of Paulette Harlow? She's a 75-year-old elderly woman from Massachusetts with a debilitating medical condition. She was prosecuted for violating the FACE Act and sentenced to 2 years in prison. She has to go to Texas in 2 weeks. She was praying at an abortion clinic in Washington, D.C. The FBI interrogated and investigated her. Do you think it is appropriate for a 75-year-old woman who is praying at a clinic in D.C. to be put in prison for 2 years for that activity? Just a simple question. Do you think that's appropriate?
I'm not familiar with the specific case.
You're not familiar with that case. It's been significantly in the headlines, but you don't know how to comment on that case, that it's appropriate for a 75-year-old woman to be put in prison for 2 years for praying at a clinic.
Again, since I'm not familiar with the case, I don't want to start weighing in because I don't know all the facts. But what I can tell you is that when it comes to FACE Act enforcement and abortion-related violent extremism, I think one of the things that gets lost, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify it, is that really since the Dobbs decision, actually more of our abortion-related violent extremism investigations have focused on violence against pro-life facilities as opposed to the other way around. And we've had a number of investigations. We're using FACE Act resources and our JTTFs.
We're still waiting on responses on letters that we've sent indicating the data to the contrary, that there's been significant amount of efforts in targeting of people who are pro-lifers who go to clinics, and that they've been prosecuted, like this case, a 75-year-old woman who is now going to jail in Texas for 2 years because she was praying at a clinic in Washington, D.C. And we've submitted questions on that, and I'd appreciate a response on it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Investigatory arm that does the disciplinary process.
Okay. Will you report back to this committee any other incidents?
I'll do my best to share information with the committee.
You testified earlier that the FBI maintains high standards irrespective of so-called diversity efforts. Is it true that in December of 2016, former Director Comey lowered the passing standards for Phase 1, allowing an influx of previously unqualified applicants to continue in the hiring process who normally would have been stopped back in December of 2016?
Yeah, I can't speak to Director Comey's
What were the standards?
changes. I can tell you that at least since I've been director, changes that we have made to.
Well, we're standing on a specific question. Were standards changed? Phase 1, this is a specific part of the process. Were they changed in 2016?
Well, I don't recall if they were changed in 2016. Obviously, I started, as your question presupposes, after that. What I can tell you is, since that time, we have made changes to various phases of the process, but none of them, this is important, none of them lowered the standards. In fact, if anything, they actually increased.
Are you familiar with reporting that we have, and we've asked questions to you about this, I'm not sure the result of the questions, that to more, quote, easily accommodate a larger pool of available applicants, FBI special agent hiring standards have been relaxed and requirements measurably lowered. This according to a group of former agents who have testified about this and written a report and submitted it to Congress. In addition, specifically, minority, people with 20-year careers, one in particular, a minority served for more than 20 years, wrote in this report and submitted it to Congress saying that these standards were in fact lowered, and that in fact, if you were hiring, you were moved off of hiring if you put quality above these kinds of DEI requirements. Do you reject this report? And do you have comments on this report?
I haven't read.
You're aware of the report?
I'm aware of the report. I know that I've read every detail of it, but I can tell you that the claim that we have lowered our standards to be less selective and less competitive is not accurate.
So do you believe these former agents are lying to Congress when they submit a report to Congress stipulating and suggesting otherwise? Or are you saying that they are lying?
I'm saying they're mistaken.
Okay, but they're affirmatively on the record. They're telling us and submitting a report to Congress saying that those facts are directly in contradicting what you're testifying here today. So I just want to be clear so we know we're saying that they are submitting evidence to our record to the contrary that you say is untruthful.
I encounter all the time when I travel around the country and have conversations with our agents, and one of the things I try to do is have meetings with some of the longer serving agents without executive management.
That's okay. My only question is that,
and my point here's
the implication is it's untruthful. So I need to move on. I got 1 minute left. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Director Ray, for being here. When did you last speak with President Biden?
I don't have the exact date, but it's been certainly since the since the shooting.
So you have spoken to the president since the assassination attempt on President Trump's life?
Yes, sir.
And what was the mental state of the president?
We had a perfectly professional conversation.
And do you have any scheduled briefings of the president upcoming?
Not at the moment specifically scheduled, no.
In 2016 and 2015, top FBI officials infamously texted about, quote, their insurance policy to make sure Trump was never elected or inaugurated as president. Have any FBI agents texted, emailed, or expressed disappointment that Trump survived the assassination attempt or otherwise editorialized about the assassination attempt?
I don't know about any agents. There have been at least 2 instances, I think, or 1 instance of an individual who posted something that I consider outrageous and totally inappropriate and unacceptable. And that individual has been referred to our inspection division, which is the arm, our sort of internal affairs investigatory arm that does the disciplinary process.
Okay. Well, Ms. Mitchell, if you might respond to some of the allegations that were just made. The bill specifically contemplates ensuring through its own text that those that are naturalized would get materials, there'd be a requirement under law that the federal government would get those materials to states immediately, so it would avoid the problem of those who are naturalized having not have the documentation necessary, as well as providing for a mechanism by which an individual can go and register to vote with the sworn affidavit of those that are there in the officials in the local government, acknowledging that they've done what they need to do to present the information. In other words, we provide every means possible. Would Ms. Mitchell agree with that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I think that one of the things that's really important is to actually read the bill. And if you read the bill, then you will understand that there's a whole laundry list of types of documentation that can be used, and there are a couple of fail-safe follow-ups, and then there's a catch-all, which is, or any other reasonable approach that the election officials may decide. There's really no reason to make that the boogeyman. The problem is that we have a very porous voter registration system in this country, right, and we have to do something to protect the integrity of our elections.
Would you agree that the construct under the SAVE Act is far less onerous than that of numerous states, including New York, Pennsylvania, and other states, in terms of what they have to do for driver's licenses, for example?
Well, yes, and here's the other thing. Congress passed the Real ID law years ago, and in order to get a Real ID, you don't have to be a citizen, but you do have to provide either your citizenship data or you have to provide your paperwork showing that you're in the country legally, that you're a permanent resident with a green card. So Congress has already addressed the issue in a context with which Congress cared about, which is that we want to protect federal buildings, federal military installations, and commercial aircraft from people who we want to know who they are when they're entering those facilities. And so Congress has already taken the step to identify a process, and I don't know why voting should be any less susceptible to improper.
I agree. Secretary Byrd, I'd like to turn to you, and I appreciate you being here again and illuminating how you guys are engaging with it in Florida. Does the Constitution give states primary jurisdiction over elections?
It does, Article 1, Section 4.
If the state of Florida passed a law requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections, if they did that right now, without the SAVE Act, would you be able to enforce that law under existing law and precedent?
We would not. We'd be in violation of the NVRA.
And can you explain that quickly for the average viewer?
Sure. Well, the NVRA prohibits states from requiring citizenship documentation on the front end when somebody registers to vote. So we are in federal courts and interpreting the NVRA. Most recently, the United States Supreme Court has said that we cannot require that proof of citizenship. We have to add the person to the rolls, and then only on the back end do the list maintenance. And so in essence, we're playing whack-a-mole with people who we've seen repeatedly register and removed because we can't require the information on the front end.
Am I correct that Florida was only able to really truly gain access to the SAVE system because you sued to do so?
That is correct.
So states have barriers in order to get to the federal government, in order to get the information necessary to determine who citizens are in the first place, correct?
That is correct.
Florida sued in order to gain access to the SAVE system, but am I correct that the SAVE system is still inferior in terms of you being able to have access to the information needed to check citizenship?
Woefully inadequate, untimely, it costs the states money, and many times we don't have the information necessary from the individual attempting to register to vote to gain access, which then we don't have the verification, even when we do have access to it.
So without the SAVE Act, can you, as Secretary of State, be as confident as you feel you should be that we know we do not have citizens voting in the state of Florida, non-citizens voting in the state of Florida?
It makes it very difficult to fulfill my constitutional duties.
Order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on non-citizen voting. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. I thank our witnesses for being here today. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. As Americans, we know that to be self-evident truth listed in the Declaration of Independence. But it really was something truly unique both at the time and in human history. We as American citizens are not ruled, we govern. The way we do that is at the ballot box. But President Biden and Kamala Harris's border crisis poses a direct threat to this fundamental right, and it is intentional. Radical progressive Democrats' near universal opposition to both H.R. 2 and the SAVE Act prove that this is all by design. Now, less than 2 months before the 2024 election, this threat could not be more real. Last week, I released a 36-page report detailing the scope of the border crisis. The report illustrates how Biden-Harris open border policies are fundamentally remaking America. More specifically, it analyzes how the massive influx of illegal aliens under this administration, on top of the millions of non-citizens already living in the United States, could upend federal elections for years to come. Since President Biden and Kamala Harris took office, over 8.5 million illegal aliens have crossed the southern border. 5.6 million illegal aliens have been released directly into the United States. Almost 2 million illegal aliens that we know of have evaded Border Patrol as what are called gotaways. Taken together, at least 7.5 million illegal aliens have entered the United States since January 2021, and they are living in every corner of the country. This year, the foreign-born population hit a record of over 50 million, 15.6% of the total population, the highest level in U.S. history. Conservative estimates show non-citizens make up about 30 million of that population, but it very well could be much higher. Non-citizens will vote in the 2024 election because our system not only makes it easy to do, but incentivizes doing so. The Biden-Harris administration baselessly claims it is extraordinarily rare for non-citizens to illegally vote in federal elections. A 2014 study from professors at Old Dominion University and George Mason University estimated that 6.4% of non-citizens, 1.2 million individuals at that time, illegally voted in the 2008 election. The study concluded that non-citizens very well may have tipped the 2008 Minnesota Senate race in Al Franken's favor and drove President Obama's victory in North Carolina. We can debate the merits of that study, but the point remains. It would only take a few thousand non-citizens voting, much less than the 1.2 million estimated, to impact the outcome of our razor-thin elections. In the 2020 presidential election, regardless of what you think, Arizona was carried by about 10,000 votes, Georgia by about 12,000 votes, Wisconsin by about 20,000 votes, and Pennsylvania by 81,000 votes. Democrats know this, which is why they try to downplay and distract from the issue. The other side also loves to point out that, quote, it is already illegal for non-citizens to vote. That is technically true. They fail to mention that the Supreme Court's interpretation of the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, or the NVRA, literally prohibits states from verifying citizenship during the voter registration process. This means it is impossible for states to enforce the law on the front end. Consequently, the primary defense against non-citizens registering to vote is a literal box-checking exercise on a voter registration form. This is the only barrier the American people have to ensuring that only citizens vote. Because of the Supreme Court ruling in Arizona, an individual who can prove they are a United States citizen is given a full ballot that includes all federal, state, and local elections. But someone who cannot prove they are a United States citizen is given a federal-only ballot, meaning they can vote in presidential, Senate, and congressional elections. That is the upside-down world that we've created. As of August 9th, there were over 41,000 federal-only voters in Arizona who could not prove they were U.S. citizens. Think about that. But the absurdity of the NVRA doesn't stop there. It also forces states to provide voter registration forms to applicants for driver's licenses or welfare benefits. This presents multiple opportunities for non-citizens to register to vote. Every state in the union allows non-citizens to get a driver's license. 19 states and D.C. even allow illegal aliens to get a driver's license. And millions of non-citizens, including many illegal aliens, are eligible for welfare benefits. We know the NVRA is broken because non-citizens are registering to vote and voting. Since 2021, Texas has removed over 6,500 non-citizens from its voter rolls. Over 1,900 had voting histories. Since 2022, Virginia has removed 6,300 non-citizens from its rolls. Alabama removed 3,251 non-citizens from its rolls. Ohio identified 597 non-citizens, 138 had voter histories. The states that are doing the right thing and removing non-citizens from their voter rolls are fighting with one arm tied behind their backs because they get almost no help from the federal government. And Democrat-run states appear to have made little to no effort to clean their voter rolls of non-citizens. I introduced the SAVE Act to ensure that non-citizens, whether knowingly or unknowingly, do not take advantage of our flawed voter registration system. The bill is a simple bill that requires states to obtain proof of citizenship before registering an individual to vote in federal elections. A recent poll found that over 80% of Americans support requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. SAVE Act's proof of citizenship requirement will ensure that non-citizens do not register to vote, but is easier for U.S. citizens to comply with than driver's license applications in states like New York and Pennsylvania. The bill also requires every state to identify and remove non-citizens on their voter rolls and gives them immediate, no-cost access to federal resources containing citizenship data to do so. Finally, it imposes penalties on officials who illegally register non-citizens to vote. It passed the House in July with 5 Democrats supporting it. Unfortunately, 198 Democrats, including every Democrat on this subcommittee, voted against it. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has refused to hold a vote on the bill in the Senate, and President Biden even threatened to veto it. Now Democrats are threatening to shut down the government because they are so vehemently opposed to preventing non-citizens from voting. So I asked my Democrat colleagues one simple question: why? And the answer is obvious. My colleagues want citizens to legally vote in 2024 election and future elections. It's the only reasonable explanation after forcing years of chaos on the American people. They believe this will help their election prospects and advance their quest to fundamentally remake America. As Congress, we have a constitutional and moral obligation to ensure that does not happen. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for her opening statement. Question for you, Ms. Santino, and I apologize, I think I was not pronouncing it exactly correct. Ms. Santino, how many Democrats voted for the SAVE Act in July?
I'm not aware. I can look into it and get back to you.
It would five Democrats voted for it, and 3 of whom are Hispanic, one of whom is black. Do you believe that their vote was a discriminatory vote?
Do I believe their votes were discriminatory?
Right. Do you believe those votes, or that they supported that or voted for that because they support discriminating against minority voters?
I believe that those votes are bad public policy.
Ms. Jenks, you mentioned earlier, but I want to explore just a little further, that last Congress, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle passed legislation, the Dream and Promise Act, that in part allows DHS to waive the inadmissibility of aliens that illegally voted if doing so is deemed to be in the public interest. Now, why would they do that if there's not a problem with people who are illegally present in the United States voting?
There's only one reason to do that, and that is that illegal aliens are voting. I mean, there's no other explanation. And by the way, the American Dream and Promise Act that was introduced in this Congress contains the same provision. And the U.S. Citizenship Act that the Biden administration wrote and submitted to Congress in like the first week is worse because it actually automatically waives non-citizen voting and false claims to U.S. citizenship, so registering to vote.
How many illegal aliens has the Biden-Harris regime allowed into the country in their tenure?
At least 7.5 million allowed to enter into the country and remain.
And that number comes from public sources, right? The government reported sources of the number of releases into the United States, whether they're unaccompanied alien children or whether they're notices to appear under the parole program, via the CBP-1 app, whatever it is, the releases under the administration's policies, which total somewhere in the range of 5.5 million plus the roughly 2 million gotaways. Is that correct?
Yes.
So 7.5 million people now in the United States. If just 1% of those individuals, we're talking, doing math in my head real quick, is that 75,000? If 1% of those individuals were to register to vote, that's a pretty significant number, correct? That could have a significant impact on elections in states where, for example, Al Franken won his Minnesota Senate seat by 300 votes, where a number of congressional colleagues of ours have won by 300 and something votes, where Merritt Miller Meeks won by 6 votes. So would you agree that's a pretty significant number?
Absolutely, and it's not just the 7.5 million illegal aliens, it's also the rest of the non-citizens who are in the country. So legal immigrants, refugees, they're all foreign students, all of these categories of non-citizens, all of them representing 30 million people, some percentage are voting.
Ms. Mitchell, there have been concerns stated by some colleagues, frankly on both sides of the aisle, that if we pass the SAVE Act today, about 2 months out before the election, that it would have a limited impact. Now, my perspective and my answer, I want to see if you would agree, is that the SAVE Act is effective at the time of enactment. That's how it's designed, that is how it's written. That 22 states and the District of Columbia allow voters to register to vote on election day, meaning passing the SAVE Act would have an impact all the way up to Election Day. That the SAVE Act also requires all states to remove non-citizens from their existing roles through Election Day and gives them the tools to do so that we've discussed, access to the databases that we've talked about. And so would you agree that even if we pass the SAVE Act now, or in the coming week or two, that it would have a massive impact on securing the 2024 election?
I absolutely do, and that's why I think it's so important that you're having this hearing, and I think it's so important for Congress to pass the SAVE Act, for it to become effective immediately.
Is there, Mr. Secretary Byrd, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, what the SAVE Act, or what the NVRA prohibits is a systematic removal process. States can still do an individualized process per person. If we had more access to more information, we could definitely do more list maintenance, which is critical to ensuring a fair election and trust in the electorate.
Without the SAVE Act or something similar, are you able to know how many people slip through the cracks and vote illegally, or illegally present in the United States and vote in the state of Florida?
It makes it very, very difficult to near impossible.
Well, I appreciate that. And now,
The chair yields the remainder of his time to the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the witnesses. I thank the chairman. Ms. Nungaray, your daughter was taken from you in June of 2024, this year, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
She was killed by two Venezuelan men who crossed into Texas in March and May of this year, correct?
That's correct.
Those two Venezuelan men that crossed into Texas were released by this administration into the community after crossing, correct?
That's correct.
Do you believe that your daughter would be here today if they had not been released into the United States?
I so heartedly believe that, yes.
Ms. Marin, your daughter was taken from you in August of 2023, correct?
Yes.
Killed by a man from El Salvador who crossed illegally and was a gotaway. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you believe your daughter would be here today if the current administration were not overwhelming border patrols such that we have 2 million known gotaways over the last 3 years?
I think that if we had the policies in place that we did a few years ago that vetted the immigrants that came in, that my daughter would still be here.
Ms. Nobles, your daughter was taken from you in July of 2022. Is that correct?
Yes.
By a 17-year-old from El Salvador who entered in March of 2022, just a few months before, correct?
Correct.
Was released into the country. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you believe that your daughter would be here today if that individual had not been released into the country according to a mass release program that has been underway for the last 3 years?
Yes, she would be alive today if they would have made that one phone call to El Salvador to check, because he did have a criminal record in 2020 and gang-related tattoos.
I yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the gentleman
From Texas, recognized.
I thank the chairman. I want to finish the line of questioning that I started before. Ms. Aguirre, I'm going to come back to you on something more specific, but just on this simple question. You told a story of Maria Gonzalez, the 11-year-old girl who was taken from her father and was killed by a 17-year-old Guatemalan released into the United States. Is that correct? In microphones, yes.
That's
So that
right.
is correct. And then I would say for Ms. Fundner, your son Weston lost his life to fentanyl poisoning, correct?
Correct.
Now, unlike the specifics of some of these other witnesses, you can't say for certain exactly how that fentanyl got through to your son. But you would agree that Weston is one of hundreds of thousands, correct? I think one of you testified to 300,000 lost lives.
Absolutely.
And so the many faces of fentanyl, right? The many faces of fentanyl. Can we say that we are losing more Americans to fentanyl poisoning as a direct consequence of open borders allowing fentanyl to pour into our communities? Would you agree with that, Ms. Fundner?
100%.
We have witnesses here at the table talking about the crimes that affected them directly. I would ask Sheriff Bedreau, just a kind of a yes or no or quick response to this question. In 2021, there were 11,200 pounds of fentanyl seized. You go to crime, in 2022, we had 12,000 criminal alien arrests at the border. In 23, border agents apprehended 15,000 criminals. With 2 months left in FY24, we are also at 15,000 criminal arrests, and the year isn't over yet, so it's surging. But here's the real problem, because my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will say, oh, look, it's working, they're doing their job. But while Border Patrol has intercepted those increasing numbers of criminals, DHS whistleblowers revealed on August 11, 24, that as many as 950,000 violent criminals have gone unidentified. In your experience, do you think it is an accurate assessment that scores, thousands of criminals are coming into the United States and being released or getting away from authorities?
That is accurate and true.
And that in your experience, you see it in real time. Is that correct, Sheriff?
In real time.
So we've talked about all of the impacts on the individuals that are testifying here. Ms. Aguirre, I wanted to see if this would surprise you. I released a report, my office did, entitled Border Invasion, or America Invaded. And in it, I detailed 50 examples that we found, 50 examples, and there were more. We had to cut the list off in order to make sure we had room. Let me just read a few of these across the country and see if you agree that you think this is a problem and what you're experiencing in your life representing people that are victims. September 3rd, the consequences of the Biden-Harris administration's open border policies, the case of the illegal alien brutally assaulting a teenage Louisiana girl. August 30th, the case of the illegal alien who brutally assaulted a New York woman. August 17th, Brazilian migrant accused of multiple Massachusetts sex crimes arrested. August 15th, Haitian illegal immigrant charged with raping pregnant woman at Massachusetts migrant motel. August 15th, U.S. officials nab Peruvian gang leader wanted for nearly 24 killings in home country. August 14th, machete wielder at Capitol was a legal immigrant despite being a priority, quote unquote, for detention. August 13th, migrant charged with rape in third NYC sex crime bust of an asylum seeker in 2 weeks. August 12th, NYC migrants, including one charged in sex assault 4 months ago, raped woman at knife point, beat her boyfriend. August 7th, Venezuelan migrant with suspected gang ties released in the United States before terrorizing NYC and is yet to be deported. I can go all the way back, date by date, through the year, into last year, November 4th, 2021. Without objection, I'll insert this into the record and the thousands of examples that are plaguing Americans across the country. With that background, one, Ms. Aguirre, can you confirm that these are just a sampling of what you're experiencing as a victim advocate out of Houston and people that are contacting you across the country, that this is not hyperbole, that this is not political, that these are in fact real human beings that we're trying to advocate for? And secondly, can you explain to the American people why was Maria targeted?
You know, I'm going to start with the fact that the reason there's so many sexual assaults committed by illegal immigrants is because in their countries there's very little consequences, meaning that when there's a girl found that has been raped and murdered, it's not unusual. There isn't DNA collection, and there's no embalming, and there's no autopsy. She's buried. And along with her is what they did to her. So these predators thrive in these countries. And if you're not from those countries, you don't know that. Everybody thinks that it's like America everywhere else, and it's simply not. So when they come to this country to do this, it's because they're accustomed to doing that in their countries. And this is the problem with letting everybody in. And the case of Maria Gonzalez echoes this, because also Maria was here illegally as well. But her and her father were living an honorable, quiet, hardworking life, while this other individual came into this country as a child migrant, came in at 17 years old, and he was 18 years old when he killed her. 3 weeks into being in this country, and he killed her. The reason he chose her is because she's a child. The second reason, because she's a beautiful little girl. And the third is because she was vulnerable. They don't even have respect for their own communities, because both of these individuals were from Guatemala. Did that stop him from killing her? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it was not necessarily something that we could say, oh, well, you know, she passed away peacefully. No, she passed away fighting. She passed away hurting. She passed away losing nails, biting him, trying to get him off of her in her own home. These individuals see a little girl and they have an appetite for her. They see a woman and they have an appetite for her, because they do this in their country and it's not unusual. These are the type of people that we're letting in. By not checking, we don't know who's coming in. And you're not only, while you're reading your list, a lot of these people that they're harming are within their own, seeking the people that are in their hotels as well, that are also migrants that are being hurt. So they're hurting each other. And the same, like as you two are here in the testimony, Ms. Lopez and Dr. Mendez, you guys advocate for immigrants, but immigrants are also being victims of these bad immigrants. I just don't understand how we could let everybody in without checking them.
Thank you, Ms. Aguirre. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.